Hello, you're watching Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and it's good to have you with us. Today, I'll be talking more on the current progress South Korea and the US are making on the situation with North Korea. President Moon Jae-in on Wednesday highlighted the potential for economic cooperation with the North, but that might be some way off, with Pyongyang and Washington yet to narrow their significant differences. That will be coming up later, but first we go to our news centre to get an update on the latest headlines with Devin Whiting. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. We start with the job market. The Moon administration's been trying to grow the economy by creating more jobs and boosting incomes, but the latest figures don't paint a pretty picture. We're still stuck in one of the worst unemployment crises in the country's history. Go Dun-hee has the details.
More disappointing figures on the job fronts for South Korea have been released. According to Statistics Korea on Friday, around 27 million people were employed in South Korea last month. That's up a mere 5,000 from the same period last year. It's also the first time since January 2010 that the number of newly employed people compared to the same month in the previous year has been so low. 2010 was a tough year for the South Korean economy, as it struggled to cope with the brunt of the global financial crisis that started a couple of years earlier. In addition, the number of newly added jobs remained in the 100,000 range for 6 consecutive months in 2018. But last month, it plunged below the 10,000 mark. This is significantly lower than the last year's monthly average, which stood at 316,000 additional jobs. Breaking it down by industry, the number of newly added jobs in the manufacturing sector fell by 2.7% on year. The education service sector also saw a decline. Statistics Korea says that while South Korean exports are increasing in certain sectors like semiconductors, ship and automobile exports remain depressed, which led to fewer new jobs being created in the manufacturing sector. Meanwhile, South Korea's overall jobless rate stood at 3.7% in July, up 0.3 percentage points from the previous year. The unemployment rate for young adults aged between 15 and 29 stood at 9.3% last month, unchanged from the previous year. Ko Dun-hee, Arirang News.
Reports say South Korean steelmakers could become the target of trade safeguard measures from India to protect Indian manufacturers. Reuters reported Thursday, citing an Indian government document, that India's imports of steel from Korea and Japan have surged in recent months as they try to redirect their shipments in the face of new tariffs imposed by the U.S. The data from New Delhi said that in the 3 months from April, India went from being a net steel exporter to a net importer. This Indian steel minister told Reuters that the increase was so big that the government is considering safeguards and won't hesitate to impose them if it has to. An application was filed last month by Indian steelmakers seeking safeguards for a period of 4 years. South Korea's Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, Paik Eun-kyu, met Friday with government officials and the heads of 11 companies in Pompeo, Korea's Tech Valley, to look for ways to achieve innovative growth, one of the Moon administration's key economic agendas. Take a listen.
We will help foster a data-sharing environment to power the fourth industrial revolution. Starting this year, we will invest in 4 industry data platforms, including automobiles, biohealth, energy, and new materials. And we'll expand that number to 10 by 2022.
The companies participating in the meeting are involved in sectors ranging from food technology to sensors and robots. They shared their success stories and the challenges they overcame in scaling up their businesses. Minister Paik said the meeting served as an opportunity to understand companies' actual needs. He said the Trade Ministry will help firms expand their markets by working with the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, or KOTRA, and the Public Procurement Service in marketing, consulting, and networking. He also vowed to create a fund to help startups to commercialize their ideas. South Korea has banned thousands of late-model BMWs from the roads after a string of fires. But the problem is not being reported nearly as much in BMW's home country of Germany. There have been reports in some German business papers and auto industry media, but they haven't gone into the specifics. Major German broadcasters, including ARD and ZDF, have acknowledged that more than 300,000 BMWs have been recalled in Europe over the same engine safety concerns affecting vehicles in Korea. According to the Korean Embassy in Germany and the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, the German government has taken no official action. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he hopes there can be a big step in nuclear negotiations with North Korea. In his words, before too long. In a cabinet meeting with President Trump on Thursday, Pompeo emphasized that during the many months of negotiations, there have been no nuclear or missile tests. The U.S. also got back 55 sets of remains of American soldiers who died in the Korean War. Pompeo added that Washington is talking with Pyongyang about a brighter future for the North Korean people and said he hopes for a breakthrough. To that, President Trump said relations with North Korea seem, quote, very good. Markets around the world are up on news that the U.S. and China are going to be talking again about their trade relations. With both sides heaping tariffs on each other, though, it's far from certain that they'll be able to mark any progress. The talks are due to happen in late August, but the officials involved won't be as senior as last time. Lee Sung-jae reports.
A statement by the Chinese Ministry of Commerce on Thursday said it will hold a fresh round of trade talks with U.S. officials in Washington before the end of the month. The move offers a glimmer of hope for progress in resolving the massive trade conflict between the two multi-trillion-dollar economies. The ministry says the Chinese delegation, led by Vice Minister of Commerce Wang Shuwen, will meet the American representatives led by the U.S. Undersecretary of Treasury for International Affairs, David Malpass. It's unclear whether the trade talks will take place before or after August 23rd, which is when Washington is due to activate additional tariffs on $16 billion of Chinese goods, an action Beijing has vowed to respond in kind to immediately. The two countries have implemented several rounds of tit-for-tat tariffs on each other's goods since the start of the year and have threatened further tariffs on exports worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The last round of talks took place in early June when U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross met Chinese Vice Premier Liu He in Beijing. However, the upcoming meeting is lower level compared to the 4 previous rounds of negotiations. The Chinese government did not say what topics would be discussed at the upcoming meeting, but reiterated Beijing's stance that it opposes unilateralism and trade protectionism. The U.S. Treasury Department wasn't available for comment. Lee Sung-jae, Arirang News.
Yesterday was Malbok, the day traditionally signaling the end of summer in Korea. And sure enough, we finally got some relief from this summer's extreme heat. In fact, it dipped below 25 degrees in Seoul, a level it hasn't reached in almost a full month. Hong Yu has more.
The sleepless tropical nights that made people toss and turn because of the heat have finally ended after 27 days. Tropical nights when the temperature does not drop under 25 degrees Celsius have been affecting Seoul since July 22nd. This year, in which Seoul faced its worst heat wave ever, has seen the most tropical nights in a row, breaking the previous record of 24 consecutive days back in 1994. But last night, the temperature in Seoul finally dropped below 25 degrees, falling to 22.1 degrees Celsius. Tropical nights in Yeosu, a city in the southern coast of South Korea, also came to an end after a record 29 consecutive days. Other regions such as Daejeon, Gangneung, Daegu, and Busan saw nighttime temperatures below 25 degrees Celsius as well. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, tropical nights have stopped for a while due to the cold and dry air that chilled the anticyclone in the northern part of South Korea. Yet it is too early to say whether the heat wave has come to an end, as the anticyclone will once again increase the temperatures after this weekend. And by August 27th, the daytime and nighttime temperatures are forecast to once again increase to the level that heatwave warnings are issued. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
On Wednesday, South Korean President Moon Jae-in gave a speech outlining his vision for a peaceful Korean peninsula and one that prospers from economic cooperation. But with both North Korea and the US still at odds with each other over what comes first, denuclearization or the lifting of sanctions, President Moon's plan perhaps seems more hopeful than realistic for now. We'll discuss more on this with our expert guest in the studio. But first, let's take a look back at a part of President Moon's address from Wednesday.
완전한 비핵화와 함께 한반도의 평화가 정착되어야 본격적인 경제 협력이 이루어질 수 있습니다. 평화 경제 공동체의 꿈을 실현시킬 때 우리 경제는 새롭게 도약할 수 있습니다. 우리 민족 모두가 함께 잘 사는 날도 앞당겨질 것입니다. 국제기관의 연구에 따르면 향후 30년간 남북 병협에 따른 경제적 효과는 최소한 170조 원에 이를 것으로 전망합니다. 평화가 경제입니다.
Now, to discuss more on the current inter-Korean situation, we have with us Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Now, as we just heard from that, on Wednesday during his National Liberation Day speech, President Moon was very much keen to stress the importance and potential for economic cooperation and how that will lead to economic prosperity for Korea and for the two Koreas. But then, ironically, just a few hours later, the US placed sanctions. They announced sanctions that they placed on these companies and an individual for illegal trade with North Korea. Can you tell us a little bit more about these sanctions and what message this sends to South Korea and North Korea?
Yes, the U.S. Treasury Department posed sanctions on 3 Russian and Chinese companies and 1 individual, a Russian individual, which are related to exporting some stuffs like alcohol and tobacco to North Korea legally. But timing, as you mentioned, is very important. We had the National Liberation Day address by President Moon Jae-in about expanding the cooperation, economic cooperation between two Koreas, which ultimately he also mentioned about the railway community in Northeast Asia. Maybe there is some differences in South Korea and the U.S.'s focuses. South Korea focuses more on peace and cooperation and exchanges between North and South Koreas. I think the important focus by the United States is denuclearizing North Korea. So I think based upon these 2 different objectives of 2 countries, I think sanctions, which I think is the last leverage of the United States to achieve denuclearizing North Korea, has been posed, kind of giving some message to South Korea. Okay, we have to go into the same direction together. Now, more important thing from the United States is sanctions and denuclearizing North Korea rather than exchanges between 2 Koreas. Okay, this is also important, but denuclearization has to come first. I think this is the message by the States to President Moon Jae-in.
Of course, the sanctions weren't an official response to Moon Jae-in's speech, but there was an official response from the State Department, which said that they are in close cooperation with South Korea over the situation with North Korea. But that was all they said. It was hardly an enthusiastic response to President Moon's speech. What do you make of this kind of muted reaction? I mean, do you think Washington would have been perhaps annoyed by his speech and the way President Moon keeps pushing this kind of cooperation with North Korea?
I think the U.S. is kind of trying to stick to its original position. It has, demanded to North Korea that there should be denuclearizing moves first. For example, declaring what the North Korea has about its nuclear weapons and facilities, and give some timetable about denuclearizing North Korea to the United States. That's something that has to be done before the U.S. gives to North Korea some, declaration of the end of the Korean War. So I think this is kind of message to South Korea that the U.S. stance is very firm. And I think at the same time, U.S. is worrying that maybe the U.S. and South Korean stance to North Korea would diverge at some point, which I think is a very important concern for the United States. What U.S. is worrying about is that because of the possible differences in the U.S.'s South Korean stance to North Korea, what if the U.S.-South alliances becomes weakened? I mean, what if the U.S. and South Korea, the relationship is getting astray in the future? That's very important thing for the United States, which I think is one of the anchors for the U.S. policy towards Asia.
Now let's look at the North Korea's response as well. A day after President Moon gave this speech on Thursday, the North Korean state newspaper ran this editorial. It wasn't necessarily, they didn't mention President Moon's speech in the report, but it was very much referencing it. It echoed some of President Moon's words in it. But if we take a look at some of the passages, it says, the authorities of the South hesitate to actively join the trend of national reconciliation. And it adds that sanctions and pressure, as well as kowtowing to the US, must be rejected. Now, that's a message directed at President Moon, would you not say?
Yes, the Rodong newspaper, official newspaper in North Korea, you mentioned that there should not be any sanctions and pressures, which is kind of kowtowing to the United States. And also they said that the sanctions and relationship between North and South Korea cannot be compatible. That's something that they have mentioned. So I think this North Korea has been asking not only to South Korea, but to China and directly to the United States that there should be declaration of the end of Korean War. There should be lifting sanctions, on and on. I think North Korea is kind of really worrying about the possible change of the U.S. policy towards North Korea after the midterm election, which is scheduled in early November. And I think time is on the side of the United States. As time goes by, North Korea is worrying more and more, kind of hysterical about, not making its goal vis-a-vis the United States. Its demand of the declaration of the end of Korean War to the United States and to South Korea is getting severe and severe. So I think, before the midterm election, I think North Korea wants to make the situation in the Korean Peninsula into the end of the Korean War, into the kind of peace regime, rather than this same condition which is in the midst of the Korean War, in which there is still rationale in the United States, military attack on North Korea.
So do you think that's why North Korea continues to be very stubborn? For example, in the report, it continues to say, let us not insist on denuclearization first only, and never pardon the unreasonable act of the US forcing the North to make a unilateral concession. Now, this sounds like North Korea are digging their heels in again. I mean, does it show North Korea are not ready to denuclearize, and does it show possibly that they're not ready to change?
Maybe we can interpret this in two ways. First, North Korea is really seriously worrying about its regime. Very frank and sincere about denuclearizing itself. But this time, there should be regime stability first, regime security first, before it denuclearizes itself. That's one way we can interpret the intention of North Korea. But second interpretation is possible. Maybe North Korea does not have any, serious intention to denuclearize itself. Just, postponing and dragging time until making some kinds of changes in the mood in the Korean Peninsula. No way to denuclearize itself. Just trying to get something from the United States first, and later maybe situation completely changes. A lot of economic exchanges between North and South Koreas and North Korea, China. In which case it's impossible for Trump to go back to the maximum pressure, and then, okay, no denuclearization. Maybe this is second interpretation. We don't know which one is its intention, but we'll see what's going to happen at Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang again, maybe this week or next week.
So if we take it back to President Moon's address, there's a situation with North Korea, what they're saying, and the US showing their kind of reservations about it. But President Moon is going full steam ahead, trying to promote this image of unified and cooperating with North Korea. What does he need to do to toe the middle line and try to push his agenda forward? How does he play the middleman, the mediator between the US and North Korea?
Well, I think recently the South Korean stance has a little bit modified, I think. Before, it really have balanced between North Korea and the US. It pursued North-South relationship on one hand, but on the other hand, it also focused on the close relationship and coordination with the United States. So it was pretty much balanced, South Korean perspective. But I think now, after there has been some stalemate between, relationship between North Korea and the United States, I think, President Moon is kind of eager to push it forward and kind of trying to make it evolve very quickly in the Korean Peninsula. It focuses more on the North-South relations. Of course, denuclearization is important. I think his stance a little bit changed. He's trying to bring denuclearization by focusing more on North-South relations. So I don't know which one is good, but I think at least his stance is successful. North Korea and the U.S. is now beginning to move. I don't know what's going to be the result and outcome of Pompeo's visit, but we'll see how it goes. If his visit was successful, maybe something good will happen in September.
Sure, and then President Moon also yesterday revealed when he met with the floor leaders of the opposition, of the 5 main parties in South Korea, he revealed that behind-the-scenes negotiations were still very much going on, that they weren't known to the public, but that they were very much, a lot of it was going on. Now, it's not a surprise as such, but perhaps it's quite reassuring that all the parties involved are still talking right now.
President Moon mentioned some kinds of positive things about the possible relationship between and negotiation between North Korea and the United States. Possible, in the 4th visit of Pompeo to Pyongyang, because the working level negotiation has been undergoing at Panmunjom last week and this week, and I think next week, I'm not sure. But I think it seems like there have been some, successful result coming out of it. Maybe North Korea and the U.S. has been kind of narrowing down the differences, kind of simultaneously pursue what they requested the other to do for us, for himself. North Korea maybe promises to declare its nuclear facilities and capabilities to the United States. In response, maybe the U.S. would give to North Korea the declaration of the end of Korean War. If this becomes an agreement, I think this would be such a breakthrough that would make 2 countries to go forward in the future.
Well, next week, I think we should definitely mention this before we go. So the separated family reunions between the 2 Koreas will be taking place. Now, it's the first time in 3 years, and it's always an emotional event for the 2 Koreas, especially for South Korea, I feel like. How important and what significance does this kind of event have for the 2 Koreas?
This is a humanitarian issue. I mean, regardless of nuclear weapon issues, regardless of the sanctions, this kind of humanitarian issues, reunion of separate family between North and South Korea is something that should continue in the future. I mean, it has been 3 years. Last time that they have done this event was 2015. Even conservative government, proposes and support this reunion. All other political parties, opposition parties and ruling parties, they all support the reunion of separate families. The problem is that this should happen every year, continuously. It should be institutionalized or regularized, and also the scope should be, should be further in the future. I mean, not everybody who, requests this kinds of meeting with their family in North is, accepted. I mean, many people in South Korea is rejected. I don't know, maybe because of lottery they could not, get it, or maybe their separate family in the North, they're not sure whether they're alive or not. But all these kind of, procedural issues, kind of limiting the number of, families reuniting with North Korea, with family in North Korea. I think all these procedural issues should be remedied, and also there should be continuously, contact with their family in the North by telephones or letters and things like that. A lot of issues should be remedied in the future. I mean, this is humanitarian issues. We have to go for it. I mean, regardless of any political and military and security issues.
of course, we'd like to see this regularized and normalized, to see this happen more often. But isn't it from the perspective of North Korea? They're the ones who are holding back. But from their perspective, almost you can understand, because they're trying to control information and control interaction.
Yeah.
So it's going to be difficult, isn't it?
It is. It is. Even the separate family reunion at Kumgang Mountain area, they're allowed to come to the hotel room together, stay the night together. It's not allowed by North Korean authorities because by giving them a lot of time, private time, I mean, a lot of information that they're worrying about to be spread into the South Korean people, that's something that the North Korean authorities are worrying about. As you have mentioned, the contact and the information coming into North Korean people, that's something the authorities in North are worrying about. So maybe it is very limited. I mean, South Korean government wants to contact a lot with North Korean people, and throughout the contact change the mindset of North Korean people and society. I think that's the policy of the South Korean government, the change by contact, which has been the same as the West Germany's policy towards East Germany. But you mentioned the situation is totally different. Germany and South Korea situation is different. It's more isolated, more controlled. Maybe we have to make more and more effort and see what's going to happen. Already people in North Korea, their mindset has changed. Many people know what's going on outside there compared to the past. Many people, refugees come to South Korea. So I think time will tell how it will evolve and how the information will go into the North Korea and effectively change the people in North Korea. But as you have mentioned, it's very much controlled. I think we have to make some, remedies and some kinds of policies to deal with all these issues.
Well, we'll have to see. But thank you for coming in today, Professor, and sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.
Now, starting from Sunday, Arirang News will be bringing you the latest and updates and coverage from that inter-Korean event, that key inter-Korean event taking place, the separated family reunions. We'll have reporters on the ground covering for both our TV and online platforms, so do tune in for that. Thank you for watching and hope you have a pleasant weekend in the meantime. Goodbye.